Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, and this is a show where we just sit and we talk about games. We talk about game design, game reviews, adventure design. We done campaign clinics, and today I'm talking about one of my favorite settings of all time, which is Rifts. Now, if you're not familiar with Rifts, Rifts came out. It's probably most people would consider it maybe second wave role playing. It came out far enough away from the initial run that it's not quite a modern or third or fourth wave game, but it's definitely that from that time where people were experimenting, having had a decade or so of gaming under their belt, maybe close to 2 decades. And it started off with this company called Palladium, and Palladium had this great fantasy setting for their Palladium fantasy game. And I actually got into gaming. I think the first role-playing book I ever owned was a Heroes Unlimited book. A friend of mine gave it to me in middle school, no, grade school, because he didn't know what it was. He was drawing comics. He loved comics. I loved comics. He was like, "Hey, you should take a look at this book. In fact, I'll just give it to you because I can't make heads or tails of it," which is a common problem with the way that book is laid out. So I made dozens, maybe hundreds of superheroes in Heroes Unlimited and had no clue how to play the game until much later once I had played some other games. And they had this advertisement for this game called Rifts. And it looked cool. I liked fantasy, I liked superheroes. This seemed to blend the two of them. And I fell in love with it. A buddy of mine, Jim, got me the core rule book for my birthday. And for nearly a decade and a half, that was the only game I ran. There was always new books coming out. There was always new material to create and look at. And we had a great group. We had a group that had, I think I've talked about it before, maybe out of the 12 of us, 6 to 8 of us were GMs. So we would go to people's house and play 5 or 6 adventures over a weekend. People just running whatever they wanted to run. Rook, good to see you, buddy. 31 months as our #1 fan. That is super exciting. And well, Bob, I would never talk crap about you. I just, I'm your #1 fan. So we played a lot of Rifts. I played a lot of Rifts. And I feel like that I can speak to both the things that I love about it and the things I didn't. So I really loved the setting. It was a game setting that had a ton of really unique ideas. It was the premise of the game is it's our Earth set several hundred years in the future. An apocalypse has happened, and that apocalypse brought magic back to the world, which caused several other mini apocalypses. And now humanity is just starting to recover what they've lost and starting to rebuild their worlds. And it was a game of super high technology, like cyborgs and cyber knights and glitter boys and mech pilots and more mecha than you could. Every book had new mecha and new material to use. But it was also a game that had very high technology, or sorry, very high magic. So you could play ley line walkers or demonologists or demigods or any sort of fantasy race. And Arthur's court, Camelot, was coming back to England, and Atlantis had risen up from the depths, returned to Earth, and was controlled by strange magical creatures, alien intelligences. And there was Japan, Africa. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were roaming across Africa. And it captured my imagination. And the best part about it was, I really think I am the GM I am today because of Rifts. Rifts only had very few actual adventures. There were some in the Palladium Fantasy, much more like the old school modules, where it was like, here is the complex of magic. Here is this dungeon. In Rifts, they had this thing called hook, line, and sinkers. They would give you a hook to pull your players in, a change, something interesting that would happen, and then kind of what was really going on. And as a GM, you had to take these hook, line, and sinkers, or all of these plot hooks that they just scattered throughout the books. You had to build your own adventures around them. Now, there were exceptions, right? Technically, the Tolkien War was a massive campaign that you could play through. Juicer Uprising had a large adventure that kind of went with it. But for the most part, they were the exceptions, not the rules. The rules for a Rifts GM was, here's the sandbox, go play in it. And again, we played all through high school and college, and right up until I moved away from Chicago. That was the game that we played. And then we did a Mark and Luke and Calvin and I at Petrie's Family Games. We ran a Rifts campaign where all four of us were GMs. We had different groups doing different things. It was all kind of centered together. And I will say, when I played Rifts, I loved it. I made a couple of house rules, but for the most part, I just stuck with it. Rules as written. I think the only thing I really changed was how attacks per melee worked. Like when you dodged, when did they come off? Did they take your next action? I took them off the end of the round because it felt a little more cinematic for me then. But looking back on it, it's very clear to me that this game was a Frankenstein mashup of the Call of Cthulhu mythos and skill system combined with Dungeons and Dragons sort of combat. Although I will say it's probably the very first game that I ever played where we had an additive system that is now very popular, where you rolled the d20 and you added something to the dice, as opposed to D&D at that time where you rolled and the better your armor class, the lower it was. Right, descending armor class. In Rifts, it was an ascending armor class. And I think the Palladium system works really well in a very narrow set. It works really well for Palladium Fantasy. And it works really well for like Heroes Unlimited. So not the mega heroes that they added later, but kind of like the TMNT, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles style of like dark street level superheroes. It doesn't work really well. I mean, it's starting to show its age. I would have expected at least a new edition of Rifts, but that never came. Right? They published the anniversary edition, they published a couple of other things, but there's been no major overhauls to the Rifts system. And it's definitely showing its age. Going back and rereading it, I can definitely see the seams in the system. So while I loved the world, I kind of became lackluster in wanting to run the game as written. Now, on a completely separate track that will tie back in, I've always been aware of Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds is a sort of a universal system that comes out of the Deadlands. It's the Deadlands system kind of made more universal. And Deadlands is this great Weird West campaign setting. You can see it over here on the shelf, with magic and zombies and steampunk and Doc Holliday and like everything that you love about Westerns, but then a layer of weird magic on top of it. My buddy Calvin was really big into Deadlands, really loved Deadlands. I think it comes from his love of like Louis L'Amour. And I played a little bit of Savage Worlds, but it was mostly either a Deadlands game or I think I looked at when they did the Savage Worlds of Solomon Kane. It was always a fun system, but as you may have noticed from the shows that we do, I'm a huge fan of D100 systems. So I was always looking more for people to play D100 games with me than than the Savage Worlds game. And then two things happened. One, I started running Torg, and Shane had a lot of influence on the Torg system, and I can see that in the current edition of Savage Worlds, in the Adventure Edition, which again was interesting to me. Is Savage Worlds Deluxe used to be like you could get it for $10. It was this really small book. It was sort of digest size, had everything you needed, but it was a really cheap gateway book into role playing. And they've now gone to this stunning hardcover UV coated cover, full color throughout. Savage Worlds Adventure Edition, or Suede, is gorgeous. And even though the price has jumped from about $10 maybe 15 or 20 years ago to $40, it's still well worth it. I love this book. I poured over this book, not just because we're going to be running Deadlands starting the 6th of June, which I'm really excited about. We're going to be running Savage Worlds and Deadlands with Rook and Bob who are in the chat playing this. So I got it. I'm a game designer. I'm always looking for new systems to kind of like internalize, review, see what are what some other design minds are looking at. And then the guys over at Pinnacle, they did something I didn't expect. Something I never expected to actually happen ever. They got the license to do a Savage Worlds Rifts book. And this is the Tomorrow Legion Player's Guide for Savage Worlds Adventure Edition Rifts. So it was Rifts with a new system, a more modern system, a system that I liked, but it never really had an incentive to play. And so when I say I bought into it, I bought into it. I've got another book coming. I think Atlantis is still on its way to me. And then I hear they're going to be doing more. So, hopefully there's going to be even more Rifts. So how does Savage Rifts stack up to my memory of regular Rifts? Well, I know some of the people who wrote it, and they're great folks, and they obviously love Rifts. I think there are times in these books where the strangeness of Rifts Earth, the idea that all of this weird gonzo high magic, high fantasy is just something that always comes across in the Palladium Rifts books as completely straight. In Savage Rifts, there are some times where there's some tongue-in-cheek comments where it feels like they may be kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We all really know how crazy this is. And for me, part of the love of Rifts was this embracing of all of this weirdness, all of this rough edges, nothing fit together quite right and felt real. So aside from that, I think they did an amazing job porting the Rifts setting over to a new game system. So Rifts had this weird thing called, so they had technically three different types of damage in Rifts. You had hit points, which if you were into hit points, you were basically dead. They had structural damage capacity, which was basically a second set of hit points that allowed you to just kind of shrug it off. It came back faster. It acted as a buffer before bones started breaking and organs started getting punctured. It's probably the root of why Jackals has Valor and Wounds, because I just liked that mechanic of, hey, this is stuff that you can shrug off easily. When you get to here, you're in trouble. And then they had another thing called Mega Damage Capacity, which was basically another level of, it was every 1 MD was worth 100 SD. And it was basically to represent, hey, this higher, tougher, more resilient material. So if you had a gun, like a regular 9mm, you could shoot a normal person and do damage, but it would bounce off a tank or power armor or, a dragon. Whereas a dragon's breath, well, really good against a tank, against a normal human, did 100 times more damage, and you were basically screwed. They handle it a little bit more elegantly here in the Suede rules with heavy armor and armor piercing that work, and heavy weapons. It works. I think they do a better job at really delineating between mortal and mega damage capacity, and give you reasons why you would not always be walking around in just MDC armor at all times. Another aspect of Rifts that was always implicit to me in the writing but never really came through in the rules was this idea of you are becoming less human, you are becoming other to humanity in order to protect humanity, right? With these demons and these spellcasters and the horrific coalition states who were promoting humanity. You were always members of like a little community that went out to adventure, but you always took most of the character classes. You became something other to humanity than protected. You learned magic. You had a weird mutation that gave you psionics. You implanted things into your body to make you stronger or faster or more resilient at the cost of your humanity, your sanity, or your life. The crazies, which were people who had implants that activated different glands and psionic abilities in their body, as they leveled up, would gain more and more psychoses and neuroses, which added to their class. But the one that a lot of people loved to play, welcome back, Bob, was the Juicer. This is sort of, for me, the iconic character class. If it wasn't the Glitter Boy, it was the Juicer of Rifts, but also kind of the touchstone for me on what made Savage Worlds a perfect rule set for Rifts, but also the fact that the designers paid so close attention to the core material when they were redesigning this game. So in Rifts, a Juicer is somebody who wears this drug harness and has a biocomp computer implanted into their chest so that they are always running at like 200% efficiency. They react faster, they move faster, they're stronger, they're tougher, but those same things that make them superhuman are burning through their life. Their organs wear out, their bones liquefy, they have a lifespan, a very simple and short lifespan. But in the game, you rolled for how many years you had left. And unless your GM was keeping very strict time track, you basically played a Juicer until you hit level 15 or retired the character, because there was really no reason to, unless there was a story reason. I had a ninja Juicer from Rifts Japan that was forcibly detoxed by his character's girlfriend, who was also played by someone who I was romantically interested in, so I was totally fine with it. But there was no real reason to. You had like 3 to 7 years of life, and mid-90s, none of us were keeping track of things like that. So essentially, Bob, detoxing was very painful and damaging to the Juicer unless it was done within the first couple of years. And when my friend Allison read that, she seduced my character into a cave, turned into her dragon form, put her claw on top of my character, and then cut all of the drug links. So think like Bane going through detox. And then she went to sleep for like 3 months. So that was an interesting way of being told drugs are bad in Rifts. So Savage Rifts, you can play Juicer. And I'm going to just open this up because what's great about it is the fact that you have this thing as a Juicer called your burn die. And so in Savage Worlds, we'll cover just real briefly. Skills are rated between a D4 and a D12. Higher the die, the better the value. You roll your skill die, and you're looking for 4 is the target number, and 4 above, every 4 above that is a raise. Very similar in Torg to how 10 is your target number, and every 5 above it is an increased quality of success. But as a wild card, you also always get to roll a D6 with it. Any of these dice ace, roll the maximum value, they explode. Again, just like in Torg. Well, Juicers get another die called their burn die, and they can roll it after the fact to basically make sure they succeed on something. You only get to keep 1 die. So on any single agility, strength, or vigor-based trait roll, it starts with a 6 that cannot ace and is rolled after the trait roll. They add this die to the trait roll as opposed to taking the better of the 2 dice. And every time they roll a 1, their burn value goes down. And essentially, as this works out, the lower you get, when your burn value hits 0, you die, you burn out. But the lower your burn value goes, the bigger the die gets, because the closer you are to burning out, the more likely you're to go out in a blaze of glory. So at 3 points remaining, you get a D8. At 2 points remaining, it goes to a D10. And if you only have a burn rating of 1, you get a D12. That's a tangible clock on the character. every time they choose to invoke this burn die. And why wouldn't you? Because it's how your character gets most of their cool abilities. Especially in combat, getting to add that extra die to the trait die is huge. And yet, it's a mechanical risk versus reward that eventually leads to the death of a character. Unlike this nebulous time remaining that's just hanging over a juicer's head, assuming both the GM and the player are actually keeping track of time. So there's a lot of books out for Savage Rifts. The core three are the Player's Guide, the GM's Book, and Savage Foes of North America. Then they have Arcana and Mysticism, which really takes its look from, if I remember this correctly, the Federation of Magic books. Let me just take a quick look in here. More DBs and Mutants, the Dragon Juicer. So this is just a remainder of other cool things that have come up over the life of Rifts. Dragon Juicers, who use dragon's blood as opposed to drugs. Elemental Fusionists, which came out of a weird, I don't know if anybody even remembers the N-Gage. It's a one-and-done portable video game system. There was a Rifts game for that had the Elemental Fusionists. The Nega Psychic can cancel psionic abilities. The Zapper, which is a electrokinetic. And new Mars. And Mars are mercenaries. What does Mars stand for? It's basically your non-superpowered kind of regular Joe characters. Blood and Bane takes a lot of the stuff from the Federation of Magic source book and brings it into Rifts. Knight of the White Rose, which I think is from Madhaven, actually. Necromancers, Shifters, Heroic Vampires, Werecats. Empires of Humanity really looks at the coalition states. So, if I remember correctly, man, I could be wrong on this one. It's been a while since I've looked through this one. Delphi Juicers, which are awesome. Momino Headhunters, which are basically cyborgs that hunt, like with technomagic cyberware that hunts down monsters. So yeah, there's a lot of good material in here, and it covers a wide variety of the Rifts source books, of which there are now over 30 or 40. Getting into Rifts is very, if you find it and you like the system, there's a lot to purchase. And I would say Palladium Books does a very good job of keeping those books in print. Not a great job of delivering on Promise books. I'm still waiting on Lands of the Damned 3 for Palladium Fantasy and Australia 2, which I believe I read was coming in like 1999. But aside from that, if you want to get into, if the setting sounds cool, if you like high magic, high technology, gods, demons, weirdness, AIs, space intelligences, aliens, you can jump into Savage Rifts a lot quicker and with a lot less overhead and a lot more fun modern rule system than the Palladium rule system. I love Palladium. I will always have a place in my heart for their settings and their system. But I really wish somebody would just re-update this setting or the system. And instead, I got Savage Rifts, which is a great product. I'll put links in the show notes to if you're interested in checking these books out. We're going to be running a Savage Worlds game here, in the not too distant future. Actually, 2 weeks from yesterday will be our first session of Savage Rift or Savage Worlds Deadlands. We're not doing Savage Rifts as much as I would love to. But we're going to start with Deadlands. We're going to do the horror at Headstone Hill, which is set in Wyoming. It is a murder mystery, and an agent has gone missing. Follow us on social media. You'll see all of our sneak peeks and our reveals. And we're going to be back on Thursday with more discussion of Deadlands. I figured we'll take a week leading up to the launch of the new stream with just some discussions of Savage Worlds, what I love, and what's available. So check out all the other great shows that we have on the Iconic Production channel. I need more coffee, apparently. Yeah, money for gods, weirdness, demons. It is worth it, Bob. And again, with Savage Rifts, you get a ton of you get a lot of that lore, but also a uh, a modern rule set, and I think a very great initial hook. Players are members of the Tomorrow Legion. They have a reason to work together. They have a reason to go out and adventure. So you can check out all the other great shows on the Iconic Production channel. We'll be back tonight at 7:30 Central with the next installment of the FET 5, our ongoing Torg Eternity stream. I'll be back on Thursday with more Behind the Screen, and this Saturday we will have the next episode of the Grand Campaign going live on the channel. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I will see you all for some Savage Worlds discussions on Thursday. This has been Behind the Screen. Bob, thanks for joining us. Rook, thanks as always for being such a great supporter of the show. I'm looking forward to playing some Deadlands with you. And to everyone who watches us on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe and like, show the algorithm that, hey, this is content that you enjoy. Maybe other people will enjoy it as well. I will see you all on Thursday. I'm JM, and this has been Behind the Screen.